I opened the envelope and saw the logo first. Clean, confident, expensive paper for a firm that was clearly bleeding out. Then I saw the signature. The man who told me I would never be a real lawyer was asking my firm to save his, and the best part? He did not realize who was about to decide his fate until it was far too late. My name is Eleanor Graham, and in the high-altitude, low-oxygen environment of Manhattan corporate law, names are usually the second thing people notice. The first is the billing rate. The third is the kill count. I had spent 15 years ensuring that my name was synonymous with a very specific kind of victory, the kind that leaves the opposition thanking us for leaving them with their shirts, even if we took everything else. But on this particular Monday morning, the name that mattered was not mine. It was the one printed in embossed, serif font on the cover of a thick, cream-colored dossier that had just landed on my mahogany desk with a heavy, ominous thud. My executive assistant, Julian, stood by the door. He was young, sharp, and possessed the kind of terrified efficiency I required. He cleared his throat, sensing that the silence stretching between us was not the contemplative kind, but the calm before a very specific type of storm. "It is a strategic partnership request, Eleanor," Julian said, his voice clipped and precise. "It arrived via courier 20 minutes ago. Marked urgent, top priority." I did not reach for it immediately. I took a sip of my black coffee, the heat of the ceramic mug grounding me against the chill of the air conditioning. "Who is the suitor?" I asked, keeping my gaze on the panoramic view of the Hudson River. The morning light was cutting through the gray haze of the city, bouncing off the steel and glass of the empire I now helped command. "A firm from the Midwest," Julian answered. "They claim their litigation volume has seen a sudden surge in the last 2 quarters. They are looking for a coastal partner to handle the overflow and provide international infrastructure. They pitched it as a merger of equals. Essentially, I turned my chair around then, the leather creaking softly. "A merger of equals," I repeated, the corner of my mouth twitching. "In this economy, there is no such thing. There are predators, and there is prey. Let us see which one walked into my office." I reached out and flipped the cover of the dossier. The name hit me like a physical blow to the sternum. Hollis, Pike and Marlowe, St. Louis, Missouri. For a second, the hum of the server room down the hall, the distant wail of a siren on Fifth Avenue, and the rhythmic breathing of my assistant all ceased. The world narrowed down to those 3 names. My fingers, manicured and steady, froze on the paper. I knew that font. I knew that heavy, pretentious letterhead. I knew the smell of the office where that stationery was kept, a mix of old leather, cigar smoke, and the stale scent of unspoken disappointments. And then I saw the signature at the bottom of the introductory letter. Ronald Hollis, senior partner. The ink was blue. The stroke was aggressive, slanting to the right, just as it had been on every report card he had ever refused to sign, and on the checks he used to write for my tuition before reminding me exactly how much of a burden I was. This was the man who had looked at me across a Sunday dinner table, wiping gravy from his chin, and told me that I did not have the temperament for the law. He had told me that I was too soft, too emotional, and that if I wanted to be near a courtroom, I should learn to type faster because I would only ever make a decent legal secretary. My heart hammered against my ribs, a traitorous, frantic rhythm that belonged to a 12-year-old girl, not the 38-year-old managing partner of Redwood and Vale. I forced a breath through my nose, pushing the girl back down into the dark recesses of my memory where she belonged. I was not Ellie anymore. I was Eleanor Graham, and I was holding his begging bowl. I looked up at Julian. My face was a mask of bored indifference, a skill that had cost me thousands of hours to perfect. "Midwest," I said, my voice flat. "Interesting." "Shall I draft a standard rejection?" Julian asked, reaching for his tablet. "We usually do not entertain unsolicited partnership bids from regional firms unless the revenue threshold is above $50 million. "No," I said. The word came out sharper than I intended. I smoothed the paper with my thumb, feeling the texture of the expensive bond. "Do not reject it. Not yet. I looked at the signature again. Ronald was asking for help. He was framing it as a partnership, a strategic alliance to handle growth, but I knew how to read between the lines of a legal pitch better than anyone in this city. You do not ask for a partnership with a shark like Redwood and Vale because you are doing well. You ask because you are drowning, and you are hoping the shark is full enough to carry you to shore rather than eat you. Schedule a formal presentation, I commanded. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Clear my calendar. Cancel the lunch with the partners from the banking division. Julian blinked, surprised by the sudden shift in priority. Tomorrow? That is very short notice. Eleanor, they are in St. Louis. They would have to fly out immediately, if they want the business. They will find a plane, I said, my eyes cold. And Julian? Tell them I require the attendance of the entire senior partnership. No associates, no juniors. I want the decision-makers in the room. If Ronald Hollis is not there, the meeting is canceled. Understood, Julian said, tapping furiously on his screen. I will relay the message. 2 p.m, all senior partners. He turned to leave, but I stopped him. And bring me the rest of the due diligence files they sent. I want to see their financials. Now. Once Julian left, the silence of the office felt different. It was charged with a static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand up. I opened the financial report attached to the proposal. It was thick, dense with charts and spreadsheets designed to obfuscate the truth. But numbers have never lied to me. People lie. Fathers lie. Spreadsheets just wait to be interrogated. I ran my finger down the profit and loss statement for the last 3 fiscal years. You are bleeding, Ronald, I whispered to the empty room. The revenue was not just down, it was in freefall. They had lost 21% of their gross income in the last 30 months. That was not a market fluctuation. That was an exodus. I flipped to the client retention page. 3 major logistics companies. Clients I knew had been the backbone of the firm for 2 decades were gone. No explanation listed, just a sterile termination of services date. I looked at the overheads. Their lease debt had ballooned. They were paying 50% more in rent than they should be for that square footage in St. Louis, likely due to deferred payments and penalties. They were robbing Peter to pay Paul. And now Paul was coming to collect with a baseball bat. But the real smoking gun was on page 42. It was a line item in the insurance section. Their professional liability insurance premiums, the malpractice insurance that every firm needs to survive, had skyrocketed. An increase of 300% in a single year. Insurance companies are essentially casinos that never lose. They only hike premiums like that when they know the house is about to catch fire. They smell a lawsuit, a big one. I scanned the footnotes, looking for the justification. It was buried in tiny 6-point font at the bottom of a page regarding operational risks. The firm is currently assessing potential risk exposure regarding an internal ethics dispute and ongoing communication with the state disciplinary board. I froze. An ethics dispute? Ronald Hollis, the man who prided himself on being the moral compass of the Missouri bar. The man who lectured me until my ears rang about the sanctity of the law and the purity of the profession, was facing an ethics inquiry deep enough to terrify his insurers. This was not just a slip-up. This was a catastrophe waiting to detonate. The surge in litigation volume, they claimed in the cover letter, was a lie. They were not drowning in work. They were drowning in liability. They needed a larger firm to step in, absorb the shock, and use its insurance cap and reputation to shield them from the fallout. They wanted Redwood and Vale to be their umbrella in a hurricane. I leaned back in my chair, the leather cool against my silk blouse. I turned my chair toward the window again. The Manhattan skyline was jagged and gray, a monument to ambition and ruthlessness. I had fought for every inch of space I occupied in this city. I had clawed my way up from a shared apartment in Queens, through law school where I worked 3 jobs, to the very top of the food chain. I had done it without a single phone call to St. Louis. I had done it while carrying the weight of his words, his dismissal, his absolute certainty that I was nothing. For 20 years, I had wondered what I would say if I ever saw him again. I had rehearsed speeches in the shower. I had imagined bumping into him at a conference, flashing my partner credentials, and watching him stutter. But I had never imagined this. I had never imagined that he would come to me, hat in hand, begging for salvation. Completely unaware that the E. Graham listed on the firm's letterhead was the same girl he used to ignore at the breakfast table. He did not know. He clearly had not done his own due diligence. To him, Redwood and Vale was just a massive corporate entity, a lifeline. He had no idea who was sitting in the corner office. He had no idea that the strategic partnership he was praying for would be reviewed by the daughter he deemed a failure. A dark, cold sense of satisfaction pooled in my stomach. It was heavier than joy, sharper than pride. It felt like justice. "Tomorrow," I said softly to the glass. "Tomorrow, you are going to walk into my room. Ronald, you are going to look at me, and for the first time in your life, you are not going to see a disappointment. You are going to see the person who holds the mortgage on your future." I picked up a red pen from my desk. I circled the line about the ethics dispute on the report. Then I circled the revenue drop. I drew a line connecting them. He thought he was coming here to pitch a partnership. He thought he was going to walk into a boardroom, shake hands with some anonymous corporate lawyer, and charm his way into a bailout using his old-school, country club charisma. He thought he could lie about the numbers and smile his way through the discrepancies. He was wrong. He was walking into a courtroom, and I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. I stood up and walked to the door, opening it to find Julian waiting. "Is the meeting confirmed?" I asked. "Yes, Eleanor," Julian said, looking up. They seemed surprised by the urgency and a bit flustered by the demand for all senior partners to attend. But they agreed. They are booking flights now. Mr. Hollis's secretary asked if there was a specific agenda. "Tell them the agenda is a comprehensive audit of their viability," I said. "Tell them to bring everything, case files, retainer agreements, audit letters, and Julian?" "Yes." "Make sure the conference room is the one with the glass walls, the one facing the river. I want the sun in their eyes." "Of course." I went back to my desk and sat down. I looked at the signature one last time. Ronald Hollis. It looked so small on the page, so insignificant compared to the letterhead of Redwood and Vale that surrounded it. I closed the folder. Dad applied to my firm and didn't know I was the one holding the stamp. The file on my desk was cold. Hard fact. But the memory it triggered was a living thing. A ghost that had been walking beside me for 25 years, waiting for a moment of weakness to whisper in my ear. I swiveled my chair away from the river view, away from the empire I had built, and let the silence of the room pull me back to a different house, in a different state, where I was not a managing partner. I was just Eleanor, the daughter who took up too much space and offered too little return on investment. It started when I was 12 years old. That was the year my father decided to categorize his children like assets in a portfolio. My brother, 2 years older, was the blue-chip stock. He was steady. He was aggressive on the soccer field. He had a jawline that suggested authority and a lack of imagination that my father prized above all else. I, on the other hand, was the speculative risk. I remember a barbecue in our backyard. It was July, humid and thick with the smell of charcoal and cut grass. The partners from his old firm were there, men in polo shirts holding beers with the same intensity they held briefcases. I was sitting on the porch steps, reading a book, trying to disappear. One of the partners, a man with a booming laugh, pointed his bottle at me. "That one has your eyes, Ronald, sharp." My father didn't look at me. He looked at his beer. "She has her mother's temperament," he said, his voice carrying that casual, devastating dismissal he had perfected. "Eleanor is a dreamer. She feels things too deeply. Great for writing poetry, I suppose. But my boy? He is the one with the killer instinct. He is built for the law. Eleanor is just soft." Soft. That word followed me through middle school like a diagnosis. In my father's world, softness was not a texture. It was a moral failing. It meant you could be pierced. It meant you could be broken. He would sit us down for dinner and grill us on current events, turning the dining table into a witness stand. When my brother shouted an opinion, my father nodded. When I tried to argue a nuance, to explain the human cost of a policy, he would cut me off with a wave of his fork. The law does not care about your bleeding heart. Eleanor, he would say, the law is a machine. If you put your hand in the gears to save someone, you lose the hand. People like you get swallowed whole. I tried to harden myself. I stopped crying when I scraped my knee. I stopped talking about the books I loved. I started studying logic, rhetoric, and debate. I thought if I could just speak his language fluently enough, he would finally hear me. By the time I was 16, I was the captain of the varsity debate team. I had spent 4 months preparing for the state championship. The topic was criminal justice reform. I had memorized case law that most law students wouldn't see until their second year. I had practiced my opening statement until I could say it in my sleep. The morning of the finals, my father was drinking coffee in the kitchen. I stood in the doorway, dressed in my ill-fitting blazer, waiting. "It starts at 10 o'clock, I said. "I know," he replied, not looking up from his newspaper. "I have a deposition in Clayton. It ran long yesterday. We have to finish it today." "It is the state finals," I said, my voice wavering despite my best efforts. "I might win." "Debate is a game, Eleanor," he said, turning the page. "It is theater. Real law is done in paperwork and backroom negotiations. Do not confuse a trophy with a career. Good luck." I won that day. I destroyed the opposition. I dismantled their arguments with a surgical precision that terrified the other team's coach. When they handed me the trophy, I looked out into the auditorium. I saw the other parents cheering. I saw my coach clapping, but there was one empty seat in the third row where I had imagined he would be. When I got home, the house was dark. There was a note on the counter next to the microwave. It was written on his firm's notepad, the same notepad I saw on my desk this morning. It read, "Heard you won. Don't let it go to your head. Talking fast doesn't make you a lawyer. No congratulations. No pride. Just a warning to stay in my lane." I kept going. I graduated valedictorian. I took the LSATs and scored in the 99th percentile. I applied to the Ivy League, to the very institutions my father spoke of with a reverence he usually reserved for God or the Cardinals. When the acceptance letter from Columbia arrived, I waited until dinner to open it. I wanted to see his face. I wanted to see the moment he realized he had been wrong about me. I placed the thick envelope on the table between the pot roast and the salad. "I got in," I said, my brother, who was struggling through his first year at a state school, went quiet. My father picked up the envelope. He checked the return address. He weighed it in his hand. For a second, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Shock. Maybe? Fear? But then the mask slammed back down. "Affirmative action is a powerful thing," he said, tossing the letter back to me. "And they always need a certain quota of women to make the brochures look friendly. You got lucky. Eleanor, do not fool yourself into thinking you are special. The hard part isn't getting in, it is surviving. And we both know you don't have the stamina for a New York firm." I didn't eat dinner that night. I went to my room and stared at the acceptance letter until the words blurred. He had taken the greatest achievement of my life and turned it into a charity case. But the breaking point, the moment that truly severed the cord, came 4 years later. I was 22. I had finished my first year at law school at the top of my class. I was back home for a brief visit before starting my summer associateship. My father was hosting a cocktail party for the local bar association at our house. The living room was full of judges, partners, and influential clients. I was wearing a simple black dress, moving through the crowd, holding a tray of appetizers because my father had fired the caterer at the last minute and expected me to fill in. I was invisible to them. I was just the daughter, the help. I walked past a group of men standing by the fireplace. My father was in the center, holding court, a glass of scotch in his hand. "How is Dylan doing?" one of the judges asked. "Struggling, but he is grinding," my father said, beaming. He has the grit. He's going to make a hell of a litigator once he passes the bar. And the girl? Another man asked, nodding toward where I had just been standing. Eleanor? She is out east, right? My father laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound. Oh, Eleanor. She is playing at it. She is in some program out there. But you know how it is. She is bright, but she is brittle. She will probably end up in non-profit work or teaching. She doesn't have the backbone to stand before a judge and fight. She would apologize to the opposition before the opening statements were over. The men laughed politely. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet, terrifying sound of a bridge collapsing. I put the tray of appetizers down on a side table. The crystal glasses rattled. I walked into the circle of men. I did not smile. I did not look down. I looked directly at my father. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of the party. The conversation died. The men turned to look at me. My father frowned, annoyed at the interruption. Actually, I repeated, keeping my voice steady, level, and utterly devoid of the warmth he despised. I just accepted a summer associate position at Redwood and Vale in Manhattan. They only take 3 students from the entire country. And I did not get it because I'm soft. I got it because I have the highest GPA in my class. And because during the mock trials, I made a third-year student cry. The silence that followed was absolute. In the legal world, Redwood and Vale was a titan. It was affirmed that these men, successful as they were in St. Louis, only read about in the Wall Street Journal. To land a spot there was not just a win, it was a coronation. My father's face went from annoyed to a deep, blotchy red. He looked at his friends, then at me. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He had been publicly caught underestimating the one person he claimed to know best. "Excuse me," I said. "I have packing to do." I turned and walked away. I could feel his eyes burning a hole in my back. But I didn't stop. I went upstairs and packed 2 suitcases. I did not pack the stuffed animals he called childish. I did not pack the photo albums. I packed my books, my suits, and the letter from Columbia. When I walked out the front door an hour later, he was waiting in the hallway. The party was still going on in the other room, a low hum of chatter that seemed miles away. "You embarrassed me," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "You made me look like a fool in my own house." "You made yourself look like a fool," I said. "I just provided the evidence." "You think you are better than us?" he demanded, stepping into my personal space. "You think because you got some fancy job you are tough? You are going to wash out. Eleanor, you are going to call me in 6 months crying because they ate you alive, and I will not answer the phone." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the fear behind the anger. He wasn't afraid I would fail. He was afraid I wouldn't. He was afraid that his narrative, the story where he was the genius and I was the disappointment, was a lie. "I won't call," I said. "And from now on, I am using Mom's maiden name professionally, Graham, because I don't want anyone to think I got where I'm going because of you." I walked out into the cool night air. I called a taxi from the corner store 3 blocks away because I refused to ask him for a ride to the airport. That was the last time I spoke to him. I did not have a tragic childhood in the way people usually mean. There were no bruises, no broken bones, no police cars in the driveway. To the outside world, I was a privileged girl from a good family. But abuse does not always leave a mark you can photograph. Sometimes, it is a slow, methodical erasure of who you are. It is 1,000 comments designed to make you feel small so that someone else can feel big. He spent 18 years trying to convince me that I was nothing. He tried to write my story for me, using words like weak, fragile, and lucky. He wanted me to be a side character in the glorious novel of his life. I sat there in my corner office, staring at the financial reports of the firm he had driven into the ground. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. He had told me I wasn't built for the law. Yet here I was, sitting at the top of the mountain. While he was sliding into the abyss, he didn't hit me. He just defined me, and it took me years to peel that label off, strip by strip, until I found the steel underneath. And now, the man who held the label gun was standing at my front door, asking to be let in. I picked up the phone and dialed my assistant. "Julian," I said, my voice calm, the voice of a woman who knows exactly who she is. "Confirm the meeting, and Julian, make sure the air conditioning in the conference room is set to 68 degrees. I want it cold." I hung up. I was not the soft little girl anymore. I was Eleanor Graham, and tomorrow, my father was going to learn exactly what that meant. Managing the sheer scale of Redwood and Vale requires a specific kind of temperament, one that sits somewhere between a grandmaster chess player and a high-functioning sociopath. I am the youngest managing partner in the 112-year history of this firm. That is not a title I wear like a piece of jewelry. It is a weapon I keep sharpened on the whetstone of 14-hour days and absolute, unwavering competence. Our footprint is not just significant, it is imperial. We have 800 lawyers spread across 12 time zones. We have a dedicated e-discovery wing that processes terabytes of data faster than most governments can read an email. We have an internal investigations unit staffed by former federal prosecutors and intelligence officers who do not know the meaning of a dead end. When a Fortune 500 company finds itself bleeding in the water, they do not call the police. They call us, and specifically, they call me. My specialty is corporate litigation and mergers and acquisitions crisis management. That is the polite way of saying that I clean up messes that are too expensive for anyone else to touch. I have built a reputation on a single, terrifying skill. I read numbers like they are confessions. Words can be massaged. Testimonies can be coached. But cash flow? Cash flow is the heartbeat of a business, and if you know how to listen, it will tell you exactly when the patient is dying, long before the brain acknowledges the end. I sat at the head of the conference table in my private office, the city of New York sprawling out beneath me like a circuit board. On the glass surface in front of me lay the dossier I had requested on Hollis. Pike and Marlowe. My analytics team had compiled it in under 4 hours. It was thorough, brutal, and devoid of sentiment, just the way I liked it. I flipped past the glossy marketing materials my father's firm had sent over. I did not care about their mission statement or their legacy of community service. I cared about the raw data my team had pulled from public records, court filings, and industry whispers. The narrative emerging from the spreadsheets was tragic. Hollis, Pike and Marlowe, was a firm that specialized in the energy and logistics sectors of the Midwest. For decades, that had been a license to print money. But the world had moved on, and they had stayed still. "Talk to me," I whispered to the pages. The first thing I noticed was the client attrition. 2 major accounts, a regional trucking conglomerate and a mid-sized energy supplier, had vanished from their active roster in the last 18 months. In a firm of that size, losing 2 anchor clients is not just a bad quarter, it is a structural failure. It creates a revenue hole that cannot be filled by picking up slip-and-fall cases or estate planning for local dentists. I ran my finger down the accounts receivable column. It was bloated. They had millions of dollars in outstanding invoices. They were doing the work, but they were not getting paid. That told me they were weak. They were afraid to press their clients for payment because they were terrified of losing them. It is the classic behavior of a firm that has lost its leverage. They were acting like servants, not counselors. Then I saw the litigation search results. There was an active lawsuit filed against them by a legal vendor for unpaid consulting fees. It was a relatively small amount, perhaps $50,000, but that was the point. Firms like Hollis, Pike and Marlowe do not get sued for $50,000 unless the bank accounts are dry. It was a humiliating red flag waving frantically in the wind, but the most damning piece of information was the one my father had tried to bury in a footnote about risk. My team had found the chatter on the legal blogs and the hushed conversations in the Missouri court clerk's offices, an ethics inquiry. It was not just a rumor. A formal complaint was being drafted regarding a conflict of interest in a merger deal they had handled 2 years ago. If that exploded, it would not just result in a fine. It would trigger a clawback provision that could bankrupt the partners personally. It would shatter the one thing my father valued more than his life, his reputation. I turned the page to the personnel section. This was where the tragedy turned into waste. Hollis. Pike and Marlowe had a roster of associates, young lawyers, 3 to 5 years out of law school, who were objectively brilliant. I looked at their credentials. Top 10% of their classes, law review editors, clerkships with federal judges. These were the kind of resumes that usually ended up on my desk in New York or London. So why were they in St. Louis, working for a firm that was circling the drain? I looked at their billing hours. They were grinding out 2,500 hours a year. They were carrying the firm on their backs. But when I looked at the partnership track, it was a closed door. The senior partners, men like my father and his cronies, were holding on to their equity with a death grip. They were not promoting anyone because promoting a new partner meant slicing the pie thinner, and they were already starving. These young lawyers were stuck. They were likely being promised mentorship and future rewards that would never materialize. They were hostages to a hierarchy that cared more about preserving the status of the old guard than building a future for the new. I felt a flash of cold anger. It was not personal, or at least, I told myself it was not. It was professional offense. I hated inefficiency, I hated wasted talent, and I hated leaders who ate their young to feed their own egos. I closed the dossier. The picture was complete. My father was not coming here to negotiate a partnership. He was coming here to find a host body. He wanted Redwood and Vale to absorb his liabilities, pay off his debts, and let him retire with his dignity intact. Pretending that he had brokered a merger of equals, he wanted me to save him, without ever knowing that he was asking the daughter he had discarded. I stood up and walked to the intercom on my desk. I pressed the button for my executive assistant. "Julian," I said. "Yes, Eleanor." His voice came back instantly. "I am reviewing the schedule for the meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. I want to make an adjustment to the protocol." "Go ahead." "When the delegation from Hollis, Pike and Marlowe arrives, you are to greet them warmly, offer them water, coffee, whatever they require. Seat them in the main conference room, the one with the view of the Statue of Liberty. Let them see exactly how high up we are." "Understood," Julian said. "And you?" "I will be in my office," I said. "Do not buzz me when they arrive. Do not come and get me immediately. I want you to let them sit there." "For how long?" I looked at the clock on the wall. Time is the only currency that matters in a billing-based industry. Making someone wait is the ultimate assertion of dominance. It says that my time is worth more than yours. It says that you are on my schedule, not the other way around. 7 minutes, I said. There was a brief pause on the line. 7 minutes exactly? Not 5. 5 implies I am just finishing a phone call. Not 10. 10 is rude and looks disorganized. 7 is deliberate. 7 minutes is enough time for them to look around the room and realize that the furniture costs more than their annual operating budget. It is enough time for the silence to become uncomfortable. It is enough time for them to start wondering if they have made a mistake. I want them unsettled. Julian, I want them sweating in their wool suits before I even walk through the door. 7 minutes, Julian repeated. I will time it myself. And Julian? Yes? Make sure the dossier I just reviewed is placed at the head of the table, open. I want it to be the first thing they see when they sit down. I want them to know that I know everything. Consider it done. I released the button. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city lights were starting to flicker on as the twilight deepened. From this height, the cars looked like toys, the people invisible. It was a long way from the stifling dining room in St. Louis, where I had been told to keep my voice down and my ambitions realistic. I checked my reflection in the glass. The woman staring back was impeccable. My suit was tailored within an inch of its life. My hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. There was no trace of the girl who used to cry in the bathroom because her father forgot to pick her up from practice. This meeting was not going to be a pitch. A pitch implies that the other side has the option to say no. This was going to be an acquisition. It was going to be a hostile takeover of a man's reality. I was going to dismantle his firm piece by piece, examine the rot, and then decide if anything was worth saving. And I was going to do it while he watched, helpless to stop me. He had spent his life believing that power belonged to men who looked like him, spoke like him, and thought like him. He believed that power was a birthright, passed down from father to son like a gold watch. He never understood that power is not given. It is taken. It is forged in the fire of being underestimated. I touched the cool glass with my fingertips. "Get some sleep, Ronald," I said softly. "You are going to need it." I turned away from the window and picked up my bag. I was done for the day. I had a strategy to finalize, and a victory to prepare for. I walked out of my office, past the rows of associates still working diligently at their desks, past the partners arguing in the hallway, past the reception desk where the name Redwood and Vale was etched in steel. I walked out into the cool Manhattan evening, the air sharp and full of possibility. I used to be the one waiting outside. Now I decide who gets to walk in. At exactly 2:07 in the afternoon, the double doors to the main conference room swung open. I did not stand up. I remained seated at the head of the obsidian table, my back to the panoramic view of the Hudson River, silhouetted against the blinding afternoon light. I wanted them to squint. I wanted them to have to adjust their vision to find me in the glare. Julian walked in first, stepping aside with the practiced grace of a matador allowing the bulls to enter the arena. And then, there they were. 3 men walked into the room. They brought with them the smell of stale pipe tobacco, Old Spice, and desperation. Ronald Hollis led the pack. He was heavier than I remembered, his face looser around the jaw, the ruddy complexion of his youth fading into a blotchy, hypertensive red. He wore a navy blue suit that I recognized. It was a Brooks Brothers cut, likely purchased 10 years ago, the fabric slightly shiny at the elbows. It was an expensive suit, but it was a suit from a different era, worn by a man who believed that quality was static, that once you bought something good, it stayed good forever without maintenance. Flanking him were his partners, Walter Pike and Samuel Marlowe. They looked like terrified accountants attending a funeral. Pike was clutching his briefcase with both hands, his knuckles white. Marlowe was adjusting his tie, looking everywhere except at me. They stopped at the far end of the table. "Good afternoon," Ronald said. His voice still had that booming baritone quality that used to fill our living room, the voice that brooked no argument. "I am Ronald Hollis. This is Walter Pike and Samuel Marlowe. We appreciate you making the time on such short notice." I gestured to the chairs opposite me. "Sit." It was not an invitation. It was a command. They sat. Ronald took the center seat, naturally. He placed his hands on the table, clasping them together in a gesture of paternal authority. He looked at me, and I saw nothing. He saw a woman in her late 30s. He saw a tailored blazer. He saw the title of managing partner on the nameplate, but he did not see Eleanor. He did not see the girl who used to sit across from him at breakfast, trying to make herself invisible, to him. I was just another corporate hurdle to be cleared, another generic face in the glass tower of New York law. "Ms." He glanced at the dossier in front of him. "Graham, it is a pleasure. We have heard great things about Redwood and Vale. Your reputation in the international markets is formidable. I know my reputation. Mr. Hollis," I said, my voice cool and flat. "I am interested in yours. You asked for this meeting. You marked it urgent. The floor is yours." Ronald smiled. It was the smile he used on juries, the one that said, "Trust me, I am a good man." "Well," he began, leaning back slightly. "Hollis, Pike and Marlowe is not just a law firm. We are an institution. For 30 years, we have been the legal backbone of the Midwest. We represent the companies that build this country, logistics, energy, manufacturing. We have relationships that go back generations. In St. Louis, a handshake from us means something. We have the respect of the bench and the trust of the community. He paused for effect. Waiting for me to nod, I did not nod. We are looking for a strategic partner, he continued, his cadence picking up the rhythm of a rehearsed speech. We have seen a significant increase in the complexity of our cases. Our clients are expanding globally, and we want to ensure we have the infrastructure to support them. We bring the regional expertise, the boots on the ground, the legacy. You bring the international reach. It is a perfect marriage of tradition and scale. He spread his hands wide, as if presenting a gift. We are offering Redwood and Vale a turnkey entry into the Midwest market, he concluded. We are offering you our name. The silence that followed was heavy. The air conditioning hummed. Walter Pike cleared his throat nervously. I looked at Ronald for a long moment. Then, I reached out and opened the black folder in front of me. The sound of the stiff cover hitting the table was like a gunshot. That is a lovely story, Mr. Hollis, I said. But I am not in the business of buying stories. I am in the business of buying assets. And when I look at your numbers, I do not see a legacy, I see a liability. I pulled out a single sheet of paper, a graph with a steep, downward red line. Can you explain to me why your gross revenue has dropped 21% in the last 30 months? I asked. Ronald blinked. The smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second, before he pasted it back on. Well, as you know, the economy has been cyclical, he said, waving a hand dismissively. The Midwest has faced some headwinds. Manufacturing has been slow. It is a market correction. Everyone is feeling it. That is incorrect, I said. I did not raise my voice. I merely stated the fact. I pulled the financials for 3 of your direct competitors in the St. Louis metro area. Their revenues are up an average of 8% over the same period. The market is growing. You are shrinking. I slid the paper across the polished glass toward him. He didn't touch it. Why are your clients leaving, Mr. Hollis? I asked. Is it the market? Or have they decided that your handshake does not mean what it used to? Ronald stiffened. Clients move. It is the nature of the business. We are in a transition phase. You lost transcontinental logistics, I said, reading from the list. You lost mid-state power. Those are not clients that move on a whim. Those are institutional anchors. They left you. Why? We had philosophical differences regarding strategy, Ronald said, his jaw tightening. Philosophical differences, I repeated. Is that what we are calling it now? Because looking at your accounts receivable, it looks like they stopped paying your bills 6 months before they fired you. That suggests they were unhappy with the work product. Our work product is impeccable, Marlowe piped up. His voice was thin and reedy. We have never had a complaint about our competence. I turned my gaze to Marlowe. He withered instantly, looking down at his hands. Then let us talk about insurance, I said. I turned the page in my folder. Your professional liability insurance premiums increased by 300% this renewal cycle, I said. The room went dead silent. I saw Walter Pike, the partner on the left, flinch. It was a small movement, a quick jerk of his head, a tightening of his shoulders, but in a negotiation. A flinch is a confession. Insurance carriers are actuaries. Mr. Hollis, I said, keeping my eyes locked on Ronald. They do not triple premiums because of market headwinds. They do it because they anticipate a payout. They smell smoke. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. Is there something you would like to disclose to me? A pending lawsuit? An ethics inquiry? Perhaps? Ronald's face turned a darker shade of red. That is standard risk adjustment. We handle high-stakes litigation. The carriers are just being cautious. There is no active litigation against the firm that is not frivolous. So there is no ethics complaint currently sitting with the Missouri Disciplinary Board? I asked. I made it a question, but my tone made it a statement. Ronald's eyes widened slightly. He had not expected me to know that. He thought he was dealing with a New York lawyer who only looked at the top line. He didn't know he was dealing with someone who had spent her childhood learning to spot his lies. There is a minor misunderstanding, Ronald stammered. A conflict of interest allegation regarding the Sheffield merger. It is baseless. We are handling it. It will be dismissed within the month. A conflict of interest allegation is not a misunderstanding in my world, I said. It is a cancer. If that complaint is substantiated, your insurance cap will be blown. If Redwood and Vale acquires you, we inherit that exposure. Why would I take that risk? Because we have the talent, Ronald snapped, his temper fraying. We have the best litigators in the state. Do you? I asked. I looked at your roster. You have 12 senior partners, all over the age of 60. You have 20 associates who are doing 90% of the billing, but none of them have been made partner in the last 5 years. I looked at the organizational chart I had printed out. Where is your succession plan, Mr. Hollis? Who runs the firm when you retire? Or is the plan simply to squeeze every last dollar out of the associates until the lights go out? The associates are not ready, Ronald said sharply. They lack the seasoning. They lack the grit. This generation, they want everything handed to them. They do not know how to build a case. I almost laughed. It was the same line he had used on me 20 years ago. Not ready. No grit. Too soft. And you do? I asked. You know how to build a case? Because your balance sheet says you are building a ruin. Ronald stood up. He placed his hands flat on the table and leaned toward me, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. It was a bully's move. Now listen here, Ms. Graham, he growled. You are looking at numbers on a page. You do not know my firm. You do not know the Midwest. You are a young woman sitting in a glass tower in Manhattan. You have no idea what it takes to survive in the trenches for 30 years. We have respect. We have history. You cannot quantify that in a spreadsheet. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I looked up at him with absolute, terrifying calm. I understand more than you think. Mr. Hollis, I said softly, I understand that you are paying $50 a square foot for office space in a market that averages 30. I understand that you have taken out a line of credit against your personal assets to make payroll last month, and I understand that you are not here to offer me a partnership. You are here because you are drowning. Ronald stayed standing, but the air seemed to go out of him. The mention of the personal line of credit had hit home. It was a secret he likely hadn't even shared with Pike and Marlowe. I watched the realization dawn on the other two partners. They looked at Ronald with shock. They didn't know. He had lied to them too. Sit down, Ronald, I said. He hesitated, then slowly sank back into his chair. He looked smaller now. The bluster was gone, replaced by the stark reality of his situation. I have one final question, I said. The room was so quiet, I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. If Redwood and Vale says no, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What is plan B? I waited. I let the silence stretch. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Ronald opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Pike. Pike looked at the floor. Marlowe was staring at the blank notepad in front of him as if praying for a fire drill. There was no plan B. There was no other suitor. There was no secret cash reserve. There was no big case coming in to save the day. This was it. I was the last stop before bankruptcy. That is what I thought, I said. I closed the black folder. I do not see a strategic fit, I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. Your firm is over-leveraged, undermanaged, and ethically compromised. You have an aging leadership team that refuses to yield to talent, and a client base that is eroding faster than your revenue. We can restructure, Ronald said, his voice pleading now. We can make changes. If you give us the capital, we can turn it around. Capital follows strategy. Mr. Hollis, I said, you do not have a strategy. You have an ego. I stood up. The proposal is rejected. I did not offer a handshake. I did not offer a polite phrase about keeping their resume on file. I simply gathered my papers. Julian will validate your parking, I said. I turned my back on them and walked toward the door of my private office. Wait, Ronald called out. I paused. My hand on the doorknob. I did not turn around. You are making a mistake, he said. His voice was shaking. You are throwing away a legacy. I am saving my firm from buying a corpse, I said. I walked into my office and closed the door. Through the glass wall, I watched them. Ronald sat there for a long time, staring at the empty chair where I had been. He looked old. He looked defeated. But he still didn't know. He thought he had just been rejected by a ruthless corporate lawyer. He didn't know that the rejection had been signed 25 years ago, in a kitchen in St. Louis. When he told a 12-year-old girl she wasn't good enough, I walked to my desk and sat down. My heart was beating slow and steady. Phase 1 was complete. I had stripped him of his delusions. Now, he knew he was dying, and that meant he was ready for the real negotiation. The sound of my office door clicking shut was supposed to be the end of it. It was the period at the end of the sentence, but Ronald Hollis had never been a man who understood punctuation, especially when it was dictated by someone he considered his inferior. I had barely taken my seat behind my desk when the door was flung open again. It hit the stopper with a violence that made the glass walls vibrate. Julian, my assistant, was fluttering behind him, looking apologetic and terrified, but I held up a hand to stop him. It is fine, Julian, I said, my voice ice cold. Leave us. Julian retreated, closing the door softly, leaving me alone with the 3 men who were currently watching their futures evaporate. Ronald marched up to my desk. His face was a map of fury, the veins in his neck bulging against his collar. He placed both hands on the edge of my desk and leaned in, invading my space in a way that was meant to remind me of my place in the food chain. You do not walk away from me, he seethed. Spittle flew from his lips. You do not dismiss 30 years of legal excellence with a wave of your hand and a lecture on accounting. Do you have any idea who I am? Do you have any idea what I have built? I did not flinch. I did not recoil. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on top of the leather blotter. I know exactly what you have built, Ronald, I said. I just told you. You have built a house of cards that is currently on fire. You are insolent, he shouted. The volume of his voice was designed to cow a courtroom, to rattle a witness. You are a number-crunching bureaucrat who thinks a spreadsheet is the same thing as a legacy. You are insulting my life's work. You are humiliating me in front of my partners. I felt a sharp, cold spark ignite in my chest. It was not anger. It was something far more volatile. It was the accumulation of 2 decades of silence. Humiliation? I repeated the word, tasting it. You want to talk about humiliation? I stood up. I did not stand up quickly. I unfolded myself from the chair with a slow, deliberate grace that made Ronald pause. I walked around the edge of the desk until I was standing 2 feet away from him. I was wearing 4-inch heels, which put me directly at eye level with him. Humiliation is being 12 years old and having your father tell a room full of strangers that his son is the genius and his daughter is the scenery, I said. Ronald blinked. He pulled back slightly, confused by the specificity of the example. Humiliation, I continued, my voice dropping to a register that was dangerous and low, is winning a state championship debate trophy and having your father refuse to look at it because he is too busy grooming his successor. Humiliation is being told that the law will swallow you whole because you have too much heart and not enough killer instinct. The confusion on Ronald's face deepened. He looked at me, really looked at me, searching for a reference point, but he was looking for a child, and he was facing a shark. Who are you? He whispered. The question hung in the air, absurd and tragic. I reached out and picked up the crystal nameplate that sat on the corner of my desk. It was heavy, expensive, and etched with precise, sharp lettering. I held it up to his face. Read it, I commanded. He looked at the glass. He squinted. Eleanor Graham. Graham, he muttered. I know that name. It is a common name. It is my mother's name, I said. It is the name she gave me. It is the name I took the night I walked out of your house and you didn't bother to come after me." He froze. It was a physical reaction, like watching a machine seize up because a wrench had been thrown into the gears. His eyes widened, creating stark white circles in his red face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at my eyes, the same gray eyes he saw in the mirror every morning, and the years melted away. He saw the nose, he saw the chin. He finally saw the daughter he had spent a lifetime erasing. "Eleanor?" The word came out as a gasp, a strangled sound of disbelief. Behind him, Walter Pike dropped his briefcase. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, but no one looked at it. "Oh my God," Pike whispered. "It is her. It is the girl. It is his daughter." Ronald stumbled back a step. As if I had physically pushed him, he looked from me to the nameplate, then back to me, his brain frantically trying to reconcile the two realities. He was trying to merge the memory of the soft, dreamy child with the managing partner of a billion-dollar firm who had just dissected his business with a scalpel. "But you are in New York," he stammered. I told people you were teaching. You were supposed to be teaching." "I know what you told people," I said mercilessly. "You told them I didn't have the backbone for the courtroom. You told them I was playing at being a lawyer. You told me I would never be a real attorney." I took a step forward, closing the distance he had tried to create. "Well, look around you, Dad," I said, the word Dad dripping with venom. "Is this real enough for you? Is this office real enough? Is the fact that I hold the power of life and death over your firm real enough?" The silence that descended on the room was absolute. It was a vacuum. Even the hum of the city outside seemed to vanish. Ronald looked like he was having a stroke. His worldview, the rigid architecture of his ego, was collapsing in real time. He looked at his partners. Marlowe was staring at me with a mixture of awe and horror. Pike looked like he wanted to vomit. They realized, perhaps faster than Ronald did, exactly how much trouble they were in. They weren't just facing a hostile negotiator, they were facing a reckoning. Ronald tried to rally. He was a litigator, after all. His instinct when cornered was to argue. He straightened his spine, smoothed his jacket, and tried to summon the ghost of his authority. "This is irrelevant," he said, though his voice lacked its usual boom. "Family matters have no place in a boardroom. We are here to discuss a business transaction. My relationship with you, our past, it has no bearing on the value of my firm." I laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. "No bearing?" I asked. "You made it professional from the very first day. You were the one who brought the courtroom to the dinner table. You were the one who decided that my worth as a human being was directly tied to my utility as a lawyer. You told me the market decides value. Well, I am the market, and I am deciding." "You are being emotional," he said, falling back on his oldest, most tired weapon. "You are letting your feelings cloud your judgment. I told you this would happen. You are taking this personally." "I am taking it personally because it is personal," I shot back. "But my judgment is crystal clear. I did not reject your proposal because I hate you. I rejected it because your firm is failing. The fact that it is failing is just poetic justice." He looked at me, desperation creeping into his eyes. He realized that the old tricks, the bullying, the dismissal, the gaslighting, were not going to work. I was not 12 anymore. I was bigger than him now. "Eleanor, please," he said, his voice cracking. It was the first time in my life I had heard him beg. "Be reasonable. We have good people. We have a history. Do not burn it down just to prove a point. Give me a fair chance. That is all I am asking. A fair chance to prove the value." "A fair chance," I repeated. I walked back to my chair and sat down. I looked at him across the expanse of the desk. "You speak about fairness as if it is something you are owed," I said. "You think fairness is something that men like you grant to people like me when you are feeling generous. You think you can starve someone for 20 years and then ask them for a seat at the banquet." I leaned forward. "I built fairness," I said. "I constructed it out of 18-hour days and missed holidays and weekends spent in the library while you were playing golf. I clawed fairness out of the rock with my bare hands. I did not get it from you. I did not get it from luck. I took it. I picked up the file again, the one containing the autopsy of his career. You told me I would never be a real lawyer, I said softly. You were wrong. I am the best lawyer you have ever met, and as a lawyer, my legal opinion is that your firm is a bad investment. I looked him dead in the eye. The proposal remains rejected. My decision is final. Ronald stood there for a long time. The fight had gone out of him. He looked hollowed out. He looked at the window, at the door, at his hands. He was looking for an escape, a rewind button, a way to undo the sentence he had spoken at a cocktail party all those years ago. But there is no appeal in this court. Pike touched his arm gently. Ronald, he said softly, we have to go. Ronald nodded, a jerky, mechanical motion. He turned to leave. He walked like an old man, his feet shuffling on the plush carpet. They reached the door. Julian was there, holding it open, his face a mask of professional neutrality, though I knew he had heard every word. Pike and Marlowe walked out. Ronald paused at the threshold. He turned back to look at me one last time. He looked at the daughter he had thrown away. Sitting in the seat of power he had always coveted. He opened his mouth. His eyes were wet. Ellie, he whispered. It was the nickname my mother used to use. It was the name of the child who used to bring him coffee in the mornings, hoping for a smile. I did not blink. I did not soften. I did not acknowledge the name. That child was gone. He had killed her. I looked down at the paperwork on my desk. Goodbye, Mr. Hollis, I said to the empty air. I heard the door click shut. I sat there in the silence for a long time. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a wild, frantic rhythm. My hands were shaking, just a little. I clasped them together until the knuckles turned white. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of polished wood and expensive lilies. I had waited half a lifetime for that moment. I thought it would feel like triumph. I thought there would be a surge of adrenaline, a victorious soundtrack playing in my head. Instead, it just felt like work, but it was good work. I reached for the phone. I had destroyed his fantasy. Now, it was time to initiate the acquisition on my terms. I had broken him. Now I had to decide if I wanted to buy the pieces. Julian, I said into the intercom, get the head of our mergers and acquisitions team on the line and tell him to bring the hostile takeover protocols. We are going to need them. I looked at the nameplate. Eleanor Graham. He knew who I was now. And soon, he would know exactly what I was capable of. Rejection was a blunt instrument, but due diligence was a scalpel. I had used the hammer when I threw Ronald out of my office, but now, alone in the silence of the skyscraper, I picked up the blade. I did not just want to say no to the acquisition. I wanted to understand exactly what I was saying no to. I wanted to see the anatomy of the failure. I assembled my internal crisis team within the hour. These were not the lawyers who argued in court. These were the forensic accountants, the former intelligence officers, and the data miners who worked in the basement levels of Redwood and Vale. They were the people who could find a single deleted email in a server farm the size of a football field. I want a full autopsy, I told them. I want to know where every dollar went for the last 10 years. I want to know which clients are actually paying and which ones are just promises. I want a risk assessment on every active litigation file. And I want to know who actually owns the building they are sitting in. The team went to work. For the next 48 hours, my office became a command center. We pulled data from public records. We utilized the discovery access Ronald had foolishly granted us in his initial proposal, and we tapped into industry whisper networks. The picture that emerged was not just a business failing, it was a tragedy of ego. The first revelation came from the billing records. I was poring over a spreadsheet that detailed billable hours by attorney in a healthy firm. The distribution follows a bell curve. Partners bring in business. Senior associates manage the workflow, and junior associates do the grinding. But at Hollis, Pike and Marlowe, the curve was inverted. There was a group of 5 young lawyers, associates between their 3rd and 6th years, who were billing over 2,800 hours a year. That is a lethal amount of work. That is working every weekend, every holiday, and sleeping 4 hours a night. These 5 people were generating 70% of the firm's actual revenue. I pulled their personnel files. They were brilliant, top of their class from Washington University, University of Chicago, and Michigan. They had published articles. They had won motions that should have been unwinnable, and yet their compensation was stagnant. I looked at the partnership track reviews. For the last 3 years, every single one of them had been deferred. The reviews, signed by Ronald Hollis, were filled with vague criticisms: needs more seasoning, lacks executive presence, not ready for client management. I recognized the language. It was the same vocabulary he had used on me. He was deliberately suppressing their careers. He was keeping them as high-paid serfs because he could not afford to share the equity. If he made them partners, he would have to slice the profit pie thinner, and he and his cronies were already starving. He was eating the future of the firm to feed his own present. It made my blood boil. These young lawyers were the only thing keeping the lights on, and he was gaslighting them into thinking they were inadequate. Then came the second discovery. My head of risk management, a former federal prosecutor named Marcus, walked into my office without knocking. He placed a single file on my desk. "You were right about the ethics issue," Marcus said. "It is worse than a conflict. It is fraud." I opened the file. It concerned a massive energy dispute involving a pipeline project in rural Missouri. Ronald had represented the energy consortium. He had won the case, securing the permits over the objection of local landowners, but Marcus had found a draft complaint that was sitting on the desk of the Missouri Disciplinary Council. It had not been filed yet, but it was dated for next week. The complaint alleged that while Ronald was representing the energy consortium, he held a substantial, undisclosed financial interest in the land trust that was selling the rights of way. He was effectively suing himself to drive up the price, playing both sides of the deal to line his own pockets. "If this goes public," Marcus said quietly, "he gets disbarred. The firm implodes. The insurance carrier will void the policy for intentional misconduct. Every client they have will sue for malpractice." "Does he know this is coming?" I asked. "He knows," Marcus replied. "There are emails here where he is trying to negotiate a settlement with the landowners to bury it. He is using client funds to pay them off. That is commingling. That is prison time. Eleanor." I stared at the documents. My father, the man who preached about the sanctity of the law, was not just bad at business, he was a crook. He had become exactly the kind of lawyer he used to warn me about, the kind who thinks the rules are for other people. But the third discovery was the one that gave me the leverage I needed. I was looking at the client correspondence for their largest remaining account, a global logistics company called Ardent Transport. They paid their bills on time. They had a massive retainer. They were the only reason the firm hadn't declared bankruptcy 6 months ago. I searched for Ronald's name in the email chains. It was nowhere. The general counsel of Ardent Transport wasn't emailing Ronald. He wasn't emailing Pike or Marlowe. Every single strategic email, every sensitive document, every request for advice was directed to a woman named Claire Vance. I looked her up. She was a 7th-year counsel. She was 32 years old. She was one of the people Ronald had blocked from partnership. I read an email from the Ardent General Counsel dated 2 weeks ago. "Claire, let us be clear. We are staying with the firm because of you. If you leave, we walk. I do not want Ronald Hollis touching this file. He is a dinosaur. You are the only one who understands the regulatory landscape." Ronald was taking credit for the client, but Claire Vance was the one holding the leash. If she walked out the door, the firm's revenue would drop to 0 overnight. I realized then that I wasn't looking at a rescue mission. I was looking at a liberation. I needed to talk to them. I could not walk into their office in St. Louis. It would cause a panic. So I had my team reach out to the 5 key associates, including Claire Vance, through encrypted channels. We invited them to a secure video conference. We told them it was a confidential inquiry regarding a potential recruit. Just to get them on the line, when their faces popped up on the screen in my office, they looked exhausted. They were sitting in their cars, in coffee shops, anywhere away from the prying eyes of the partners. They looked terrified. "My name is Eleanor Graham," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "I am the managing partner of Redwood and Vale." I saw the recognition hit them. They knew who I was, in the legal world. Redwood and Vale was the major leagues. "I know you are scared," I said. "I know you haven't been made partner. I know you are billing 3,000 hours a year for people who take 3-hour lunches, and I know that the firm is insolvent." Claire Vance, the woman who held the ardent client, spoke up. She had dark circles under her eyes, but her voice was steady. "Why are you telling us this?" she asked. "Are you going to buy us? Or are you just here to watch us drown?" "I am not here to save the firm," I said honestly. "The firm is dead. The name on the door is toxic, but you are not." I looked at each of them through the screen. "I know what it is like to be told you are not ready when you are the smartest person in the room," I said. "I know what it is like to have a ceiling placed over your head by men who are afraid of your talent. If I acquire the firm, the old partners go. Ronald Hollis goes. The structure changes. You become the equity partners of the new Midwest division. You keep your clients. You keep your work. But you get the infrastructure and the protection of Redwood and Vale." I saw the hope flare in their eyes. It was fragile, but it was there. "But we need to move fast," I said, "because the ship is sinking, and I'm the only lifeboat in the water." "We are in," Claire said immediately. "Just tell us what to do." I ended the call. I had the talent. I had the leverage. Now I just needed the kill shot. I went back to the due diligence files. There was one box left to check: the real estate. Hollis. Pike and Marlowe occupied the top 3 floors of a historic building in downtown St. Louis. It was the physical symbol of their prestige. Ronald loved that office. He loved the mahogany paneling and the marble lobby. I pulled up the lease agreement. It was an old contract, signed 25 years ago, with multiple extensions. I scanned the terms: rent, maintenance, insurance. It all looked standard until I got to the addendum on page 40, right of first refusal. The clause stated that if the building were ever sold, or if the primary tenant defaulted on the lease, the right to purchase the property or assume the lease would revert to a specific priority holder. I looked at the name of the holder. My heart stopped. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. The Graham Family Trust. I stared at the words until they blurred. Graham, my mother's maiden name. My mother had come from money, quiet, old money that she never spoke about when she died. Ronald had told me that there was nothing left, that the medical bills and bad investments had eaten it all. He had told me I was on my own. But here it was. The building, the very castle Ronald ruled from, was tied to a trust in her name. I pulled the trust documents from the state registry. I followed the paper trail. The trust had been established by my maternal grandfather. The beneficiary was my mother, and upon her death, the beneficiary was me. I let out a breath that sounded like a sob. It was me. It had always been me. Ronald didn't own the building. He didn't even control the destiny of his own office. The Graham Family Trust listed me, Eleanor Graham, as the sole trustee and beneficiary upon reaching the age of 25. He must have hidden the documents. He must have forged signatures to keep the lease active without notifying me. He had been sitting in an office that effectively belonged to the daughter he despised, paying rent to a landlord that was essentially a shell company he manipulated, while telling me I was worthless. He had called my mother's inheritance dream money. He had mocked her for it. And yet, he had built his entire identity on the foundation she provided. He was a squatter. He was a trespasser in my life in the most literal sense possible. I stood up and walked to the window. The anger was gone. It was replaced by a clarity so sharp it cut. He didn't just apply to my firm. He was living in my house. "Julian," I said, pressing the intercom. My voice was frighteningly calm. "Yes, Eleanor?" "Get the jet ready," I said. We are going to St. Louis? St. Louis? When? Now, I said. I have a tenant I need to evict. I looked down at the lease agreement one last time. He had spent 30 years telling me I had no place in his world. He was about to find out that his world had belonged to me all along. I did not meet him at his office. I did not want to sit in the room where he had played king for 3 decades, and I certainly did not invite him back to New York. If you want to dictate the terms of a surrender, you do not do it from a distance. You do it on the ground, but on neutral territory where the air conditioning is set to your preference and the coffee is better than what they can afford. I rented a private suite at the Four Seasons in downtown St. Louis. It was sterile, expensive, and devoid of history. It was the perfect place to end an era. I sent the message to his personal number at 7 in the morning. Suite 404, 9 o'clock, alone, no partners, no counsel, just you. He arrived at 8:55. Ronald looked different than he had in New York. The bluster was gone. The ruddy complexion had faded into a sallow gray. He was wearing a different suit, but he looked smaller inside it, as if the last 48 hours had physically shrunk him. He carried no briefcase. He knew, instinctively, that this was not a meeting where he would need to take notes. He was here to listen. I was sitting in an armchair by the window, a single document on the low table in front of me. I did not stand up when he entered. I gestured to the chair opposite me. "Sit down, Ronald," I said. He sat. He looked at the view of the arch, then at me. There was a wariness in his eyes, the look of an animal that knows the trap has snapped shut, but hasn't felt the pain yet. "Where are Walter and Samuel?" he asked, his voice rough. "I told you," I said, pouring myself a glass of water but offering him nothing. "Just you. This conversation is not for the gallery. It is for the architect of the disaster. You rejected the proposal," he said. "We are already looking at other options." "You have no other options," I said. It was not an insult. It was a fact. I know about the credit line, I know about the lease arrears, and I know about the ethics complaint that is sitting on the desk of the disciplinary council. Waiting for a signature. Ronald flinched. It was a violent spasm, as if I had slapped him. "How?" he started, then stopped. He realized that asking how I knew was irrelevant. I knew. That was all that mattered. "You are done, Ronald," I said calmly. "The moment that complaint is filed, your insurance carrier voids your policy. Your clients flee. Your assets are frozen. You are not just looking at bankruptcy. You are looking at a legacy that ends in a disbarment hearing and a liquidation auction." He slumped back in the chair, his hand covering his mouth. He looked old. "However," I said, letting the word hang in the air. He looked up, a flicker of hope. It was pathetic, but it was useful. "I have a counteroffer," I said. I slid the document across the table. It was not thick. It was 5 pages, short, brutal, efficient. "We do not want a partnership," I said, my voice shifting into the cold, rhythmic cadence of a closing argument. "A partnership implies equality. There is no equality here. This is an acquisition. Redwood and Vale will purchase 100% of the assets of Hollis, Pike and Marlowe. We will assume the liabilities, including the lease and the outstanding vendor debts." Ronald reached for the papers, his hands shaking slightly. "You are buying us out?" "I am buying the infrastructure," I corrected, "and I am buying the talent you have been squandering. Here are the terms. Read them carefully." I pointed to the first section. "First, the brand remains. For 18 to 24 months, the firm will operate as Hollis Graham, a Redwood and Vale entity. We keep the local flavor to soothe the clients. We tell them it is a strategic expansion, not a rescue. After 2 years, the Hollis name comes off the door, and it becomes Redwood and Vale Midwest." Ronald stared at the paper. "Hollis and Graham," he whispered. "You are putting your name next to mine." "My mother's name," I said, "and it is the only reason yours gets to stay up there at all. It provides a continuity narrative that prevents the clients from panicking." I pointed to the second section. Second, the associates. Specifically, the 5 senior associates you have been blocking from partnership, they stay. We are implementing an immediate retention program, 20% salary increase, effective immediately, guaranteed path to equity partnership within 36 months based on performance metrics that I set. If they leave, the deal is void. You cannot pay them that much, Ronald protested weakly. It destroys the compensation structure. It destroys your compensation structure, I said. My structure pays for performance, and right now, they are the only ones performing. I leaned forward. This was the part that would hurt. And third, the leadership transition. Ronald looked at the clause I was pointing to. His eyes scanned the text, and I watched the color drain from his face completely. The current managing partner, Ronald Hollis, will resign his position effective immediately upon closing. He will transition to the role of counsel for a fixed term of 12 months. You are firing me, he said. His voice was a whisper of disbelief. From my own firm. I am not firing you, I said. I am giving you a golden parachute. You get a title. You get an office, a smaller one. Down the hall. You get a salary for 1 year. You get to keep your dignity in public. You can tell the country club that you are stepping back to focus on mentorship and strategic advising. And after 12 months? After 12 months. We thank you for your service, and you retire. I said, permanently. Ronald dropped the paper on the table. I cannot sign this. I am the face of this firm. My clients expect to see me. Your clients are already talking to Claire Vance, I said. They won't miss you. In fact, based on the email traffic I have seen, they will be relieved. This is unacceptable, he said, his voice rising, trying to find some purchase on the slippery slope of his demise. I built this place. I laid the bricks. You cannot just come in here and relegate me to a figurehead in my own house. I can, I said, and I will, because the alternative is the ethics inquiry. I leaned back, crossing my legs. If we acquire you, our risk management team takes over the defense of that ethics complaint. We have resources you do not. We can negotiate a settlement. We can classify it as an administrative error rather than malicious fraud. We can keep your license intact, but we can only do that if you are not in charge. The disciplinary board needs a head on a platter to show that the culture has changed. Your resignation is the price of your survival. Ronald looked at me with a mixture of hatred and awe. Is this revenge? He asked. The question was raw. Is this what this is all about? You waited 20 years to come back here and castrate me because I didn't come to your debate tournament? Because I didn't coddle you? I looked at him, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just the cold calculation of a business decision. Revenge is a waste of capital. Ronald, I said, revenge does not pay the payroll. Revenge does not service the debt on a 20,000 square foot office. My plan does. You are enjoying this, he accused. I am executing a strategy, I said. You are the one who is emotional. You are the one who let your ego drive a profitable firm into the ground because you couldn't bear to share credit with the next generation. I am just cleaning up the mess. I tapped the paper with my index finger. Look at the reporting line. Ronald, Clause 4. He looked down. The of counsel role reports directly to the managing partner of the acquiring entity. You would report to me, I said. For the next year, you answer to me. You clear your expenses through me. You submit your timesheets to me. If you want to take a client to lunch, you ask my permission. He stared at the words. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. He was imagining it. He was imagining the monthly calls. He was imagining having to ask the daughter he called soft for approval to buy a plane ticket. You taught me that the law is power, I said softly. You told me that the world is divided into those who command and those who obey. I listened to you. Dad, I learned the lesson perfectly. I am just using your own curriculum. He looked up at me. His eyes were red-rimmed. I cannot do it. I cannot answer to you. Then you can answer to the disciplinary board, I said. And you can explain to your wife why the house is being foreclosed on, because the malpractice insurance didn't cover your fraud. Those are your choices. Option A. You swallow your pride, you sign the deal, and you retire as a respected elder statesman who merged his firm with a global giant. Option B. You hold on to your ego, and you lose everything: your money, your reputation, your freedom. I stood up. The meeting was over. I had given him the terms. Now he had to bleed. I need an answer by 5 o'clock today, I said. If I do not have a signature, the offer is withdrawn, and I fly back to New York, and when the news of the ethics investigation breaks next week, do not call me. I walked to the door of the suite. Eleanor, he said. I stopped. If I sign this, he said, his voice trembling, everyone will know. They might not know the details, but they will know that you won. They will know that I am working for you. I turned around. Yes, I said. They will? You want to shame me, he said. No, I replied. I want you to see me, really see me. If you sign this, you will not be shamed publicly. I will protect your fragile reputation because it is now an asset of my company. But privately? Yes, privately. You will have to wake up every morning for the rest of your life and live with the truth. What truth? He asked. That the person you look down on, I said, is the only reason you are not in a jail cell. The person you said would never be a real lawyer is the one who saved you from yourself. I opened the door. 5 o'clock. Ronald, do not be late. I walked out into the hallway, leaving him sitting alone in the expensive silence, staring at the contract that was both his salvation and his sentence. 5 o'clock came and went. The deadline I had set in the silent, sterile suite of the Four Seasons dissolved into the evening, and my phone remained silent. There was no signature. There was no surrender. I sat by the window, watching the sun dip below the Mississippi River, and I realized I had made a calculation error. I had assumed that Ronald Hollis was a rational actor. I had assumed that when faced with the choice between a dignified exit and total annihilation, a man who prided himself on his reputation would choose dignity, but I had forgotten the most volatile variable in the equation: spite. Ronald did not sign. Instead, he went back to his office and declared war. The first shot was fired at 7 in the morning on Tuesday. It was not a legal filing. It was a headline. My assistant, Julian, handed me a tablet with the front page of the Saint. Louis Business Journal loaded on the screen. New York Giant circles, vulnerable Midwest firm, hostile takeover rumored. The article was a masterpiece of spin. It painted Redwood and Vale as a predatory corporate raider descending on a beloved local institution to strip it for parts. It quoted anonymous sources close to the partnership, claiming that the New York firm planned to lay off 80% of the staff and shut down the street. Louis' office entirely. He leaked it, Julian said, pouring my coffee. He is trying to poison the well. He is trying to cause a panic, I corrected. He wants the associates to bolt. If the talent leaves, the valuation of the firm drops to zero. He is threatening to blow up the hostages if I do not back off. I looked at the live feed from the internal messaging boards we had tapped into. The Hollis, Pike and Marlowe associates were in a frenzy. They were talking about updating resumes, contacting headhunters, and fleeing the sinking ship before the New York butchers arrived. Ronald was not trying to save his firm. He was playing a game of scorched earth. He would rather rule over a pile of ashes than serve in a kingdom run by his daughter. Get the crisis team on the line, I ordered. Draft a counterstatement. Do not address the takeover directly. Focus on strategic investment and talent retention, and find out where Ronald is right now. The intelligence came back within the hour. Ronald was not in the office. He was at a private lunch club in Clayton, a suburb west of the city, and he was not alone. He was dining with the managing partner of Lewis and Clark, a direct competitor in the region. That was expected. But the third person at the table was the one that made my blood run cold. It was Claire Vance, the young counsel who held the relationship with Ardent Transport, the single most valuable client the firm had left. He is selling her, I whispered to myself. It was a move of breathtaking cynicism. Ronald knew he couldn't keep Claire if the firm collapsed. So, he was trying to trade her to a competitor. He was likely offering to facilitate the transfer of the Ardent Transport business to Lewis and Clark in exchange for a consulting fee or a soft landing for himself. He was stripping the copper wiring out of the walls before the new landlord moved in. "Get me a car," I told Julian. "And get Claire Vance on her cell phone. Tell her it is a matter of professional survival." I did not go to the lunch club. I went to the parking garage of the Hollis building and waited. I knew Claire would have to come back to retrieve her files if she was planning to defect. She arrived at 2 in the afternoon. She looked rattled. Her suit was sharp, but her eyes were darting around nervously as she walked toward the elevator bank. "Claire," I said, stepping out from the shadows of a concrete pillar. She jumped, clutching her bag to her chest. When she saw me, her shoulders stiffened. "Ms. Graham," she said, "I cannot talk to you. Ronald said it would be a breach of fiduciary duty. Ronald is currently trying to auction you off like a racehorse to cover his own gambling debts," I said. Walking toward her, my voice was calm, echoing slightly in the concrete cavern. "I know about the lunch. I know about Lewis and Clark. He is telling you that the firm is doomed and that he has secured you a lifeboat at a competitor, isn't he?" Claire hesitated. The truth was written all over her face. "He said you are going to fire everyone," she said quietly. "He said Redwood and Vale just wants the client list and that you will replace us with your own people within a month." "He lied," I said, "just like he lied about the partnership track for the last 5 years. Think about it. Claire, if I wanted to fire everyone, why would I be standing in a parking garage in St. Louis trying to talk to you? I can buy a client list anywhere. I cannot buy loyalty, and I cannot buy the specific regulatory knowledge you have about Ardent Transport." I took a step closer. "If you go to Lewis and Clark with Ronald, you are not just changing firms. You are becoming an accessory. You are helping him loot the assets of a dying entity. When the bankruptcy trustee looks at the timeline, they will see that you helped transfer a major asset while the firm was insolvent. That is not a career move. That is a liability." She paled. "Insolvent? Is it that bad?" "It is worse," I said. "There is an ethics complaint regarding Ronald's conflict of interest in the energy sector. It is going to drop any day now. If you are standing next to him when that bomb goes off, the shrapnel will hit you. Your reputation will be tied to a man who defrauded his own clients." Claire leaned against her car. She looked sick. "He didn't tell me about the ethics complaint. He just said he was looking out for me." "He has never looked out for anyone but himself," I said. "I am offering you a different path. Stay. Help me stabilize the ship. You become an equity partner in the new structure. You run the practice group. You keep your hands clean." She looked at me, searching for the catch. "Why?" "Because you are the lawyer I would have been if I had stayed," I said. "And I do not want to see you wasted." She took a deep breath. She nodded. "I will not sign with Lewis and Clark. I will stall him." "Good," I said. "Go upstairs. Act normal. Give me 24 hours. I watched her get into the elevator. I had stopped the bleeding, but the wound was still open. I returned to the hotel suite to find the situation deteriorating. My head of risk management, Marcus, was on the video screen. He looked grim. "The timeline has accelerated," Marcus said. "We have a source in the disciplinary counsel's office. Someone is pushing the ethics complaint. It was supposed to be reviewed next week. It has been moved to the docket for tomorrow morning." "Who is pushing it?" I asked. "We don't know," Marcus said. "But the speed is unnatural. It feels like someone wants the firm to implode before the deal closes. If that complaint becomes public record tomorrow, the value of the firm drops to negative figures. We would be buying a lawsuit, not a business. It is self-sabotage," I realized. "If he cannot own it, he destroys it. If the firm collapses under an ethics scandal, He can claim he was a victim of a witch hunt. He can play the martyr. But if he sells to me, he admits failure. There is one more thing, Marcus said. He has called an emergency meeting with the building management company for 4 o'clock today. We intercepted a request to the landlord. What is he doing? He is trying to terminate the lease, Marcus said. The firm is 3 months behind on rent. He is offering to voluntarily surrender the premises to avoid eviction proceedings. If he surrenders the lease, the firm has no office. Effectively, he is evicting himself. It triggers a penalty clause of $2 million that makes the firm completely uninsurable. I stood up. A cold smile touched my lips. He is trying to surrender the lease? I asked. Yes, Marcus said. He thinks if he kills the physical space, the deal falls apart. He is making a mistake, I said. How? It is a valid legal maneuver if the landlord agrees. The landlord is not going to agree, I said. How do you know? It is a blind trust. We don't know who controls the management company. I looked at the screen. I know exactly who controls it. Marcus, get the jet ready to fly the legal team home. I am staying here. I have a meeting to crash. I walked out of the hotel. I did not take a car this time. I walked the 6 blocks to the office building. The heat of the St. Louis afternoon was oppressive, heavy with humidity. But I felt cool. I felt precise. I walked into the lobby of the building where my father had built his empire. The security guard nodded at me, assuming I was a client. I bypassed the elevators to the firm's floors and went straight to the building management office on the mezzanine level. I walked in without an appointment. The property manager, a man named Mr. Henderson, looked up from his desk in surprise. He was holding a document in his hand. Sitting across from him was Ronald Hollis. Ronald turned. When he saw me, his face twisted into a sneer. "You are not welcome here," Ronald said. "This is a private meeting between a tenant and the landlord. It has nothing to do with your hostile takeover." "It has everything to do with it," I said, closing the door behind me. "I am terminating the lease." "Eleanor," Ronald said, his voice dripping with spite, "we cannot afford the rent. I am doing the responsible thing. I am shutting down the physical operations. There will be no firm for you to buy. Just a P.O. box and a debt." He looked at Mr. Henderson. "Sign the surrender agreement. Bob, let's get this over with." Mr. Henderson looked nervous. "Mr. Hollis, as I explained, any modification to the master lease requires approval from the trust administrator. I cannot just sign off on a surrender of this magnitude without authorization." "It is a formality," Ronald shouted. "I have known the family behind that trust for 30 years. They never get involved. Just sign the damn paper." "He cannot sign it." "Ronald," I said. Stepping forward, Ronald stood up. "Get out. You have no standing here." "Actually," I said, "I have the only standing that matters." I reached into my bag and pulled out a notarized document I had prepared an hour ago. I placed it on Mr. Henderson's desk. "My name is Eleanor Graham," I said to the property manager. "I am the sole beneficiary and trustee of the Graham Family Trust, which owns this building." Mr. Henderson looked at the document. He looked at the seal. He looked at the signature. His eyes widened. "Ms. Graham," he stammered, standing up hurriedly. I had no idea. The files just said Graham Trust. I assumed it was a distant relation." "It is not distant," I said. "It is immediate." I turned to Ronald. He was frozen. The blood had drained from his face so completely that he looked like a wax figure. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, grappling with the enormity of the revelation. "You," he choked out. "You own the building?" "I have owned it since I turned 25, I said. "My grandfather left it to my mother. She left it to me, all these years. Ronald, every check you signed for rent, every complaint you made about the heating, every time you walked through that lobby feeling like a king, you were a guest in my house." He gripped the back of the chair for support. "That is impossible. Your mother, she didn't have this kind of capital?" "She had it," I said. She just protected it from you. She knew you would spend it on suits and country club memberships to prop up your ego. She put it in a trust so you couldn't touch it, and she made me the guardian." I picked up the surrender agreement he had been trying to get Henderson to sign. "As the landlord," I said, my voice steady and hard, "I reject your request to surrender the lease. The lease remains active. The firm is liable for the full amount, and if you attempt to abandon the premises, I will personally sue you for breach of contract and seize your personal assets to cover the remainder of the 10-year term." I ripped the paper in half. The sound was loud in the small office. "You tried to burn down the warehouse to stop me from buying the inventory," I said, "but you forgot to check who owned the warehouse." Ronald sank back into his chair. He looked defeated in a way I had never seen before. This was not just a business loss. This was a rewriting of his entire history. He had walked these halls thinking he was the provider, the patriarch. And all along, he had been subsidized by the wife he ignored and the daughter he dismissed. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered. "Because you didn't need to know," I said. "Until you tried to use my own property to hurt me." I turned to Mr. Henderson. "Bob," I said. "Mr. Hollis is leaving now. Please ensure that no changes are made to the lease without my direct written consent, and deactivate his key card for the building management office. He is just a tenant. He has no administrative privileges." "Yes, Ms. Graham," Henderson said, looking at me with newfound respect and fear. I looked down at my father. "You have run out of moves, Ronald," I said. "You tried to turn the associates against me. I secured them. You tried to sell Claire Vance. She is staying with me. You tried to destroy the office. I own it." I leaned in close. "The ethics complaint drops tomorrow morning. My sources tell me it is going to be brutal. You have 12 hours. Go home. Look at yourself in the mirror and decide if you want to be remembered as a lawyer or as a cautionary tale." I turned and walked out of the office. I heard him call my name, but it was weak. It was the sound of a man who had realized, too late, that he was not the hero of the story. He wasn't even the villain. He was just a tenant who had forgotten to pay his rent. I walked out onto the street. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the city. I had the building, I had the team, I had the leverage. Tomorrow, I would take the rest. The conference room at Hollis. Pike and Marlowe smelled of lemon polish and fear. It was 9 a.m. on Wednesday, the deadline I had mentally set for the execution of the firm's independence. Around the long oak table sat 12 people, the full equity partnership. They were men mostly in their 60s, with a few in their 50s, all wearing the same expression of indignant confusion. They looked like captains who had just been told their ship was not only sinking but had been sold for scrap while they were sleeping. I stood at the head of the table. I did not sit. In a room full of men who are used to sitting while others stand, remaining on your feet is the only way to hold the floor. Ronald sat at the opposite end. He looked haggard. The skin under his eyes was dark, purple bruises of exhaustion. He had not slept. I knew that because I hadn't either. I had spent the night finalizing the acquisition documents with my team in New York via secure video link. "Let us begin," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the murmurs like a knife. "We are not here to negotiate," I continued. "We are here to choose the method of your survival, or your extinction." I placed 3 bound volumes on the table. "Scenario A," I said, tapping the first binder. "Immediate bankruptcy, Chapter 7 liquidation, the firm dissolves. Your assets are sold to pay creditors. The partners, meaning all of you, are personally liable for the lease debts and the outstanding vendor payments because you pierce the corporate veil by commingling funds. You lose your pensions. You lose your homes." A murmur of protest rippled through the room. Walter Pike looked pale. "Scenario B," I went on, tapping the second binder. "The ethics inquiry. It goes public today. The disciplinary council files a formal complaint against Ronald Hollis for conflict of interest and fraud. The insurance carrier voids your malpractice policy. Every client you have reads about it in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch tomorrow. They sue you for breach of fiduciary duty. You spend the next 10 years in court, not as lawyers, but as defendants. You lose your licenses. I paused. I let the silence settle in the corners of the room. And scenario C, I said, resting my hand on the final, thin document. Redwood and Vale acquires the firm. We inject capital. We settle the debts. We take over the lease. We restructure the leadership. The associates keep their jobs. You transition to non-equity roles or retirement packages. You walk away with your reputations intact, if not your pride. "This is blackmail," a voice barked from the side of the table. It was George Abernathy, a senior partner who had been with Ronald since the 80s. He had a face like a bulldog and a temperament to match. He slammed his hand on the table. "You are holding a gun to our heads," Abernathy shouted. "You are manufacturing a crisis to steal our business. This isn't a merger. It is a hostile invasion. You just want to humiliate Ronald because of some family vendetta." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "We all know who you are, Ms. Graham. We know the history. You are doing this to spite your father. You want to see him crawl." I turned my head slowly to look at Abernathy. I did not blink. "Mr. Abernathy," I said, my voice dropping to a glacial temperature. "If I wanted to humiliate Ronald, I would have walked away on Monday. I would have let the ethics complaint drop. I would have let the landlord evict you for non-payment of rent. I would have stood on the sidewalk and watched the marshals padlock the doors while the local news cameras rolled. That is what humiliation looks like." I walked down the length of the table, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor. I am here because despite everything, I am a professional, and I hate waste. I hate seeing a firm with good talent die because the leadership is too arrogant to admit they are bleeding. "We are not bleeding," Ronald spoke up suddenly. His voice was hoarse. He stood up, trying to regain his stature. "We built this firm from nothing. I built it. I started in a one-room office on Chestnut Street with a typewriter and a loan I scraped together. I worked 18 hours a day for 30 years. I created this legacy. You cannot just come in here and rewrite history because you have a checkbook." He looked around the table, rallying his troops. "We are Hollis, Pike and Marlowe," Ronald declared, his chest heaving. "We are self-made men. We do not take handouts from New York, and we certainly do not surrender to my daughter." There were nods of agreement. The self-made myth was powerful. It was the glue that held their egos together. They needed to believe they were the architects of their own fortune, not the beneficiaries of luck or circumstance. I stopped pacing. I stood right next to Ronald's chair. "Self-made," I repeated. I walked back to my briefcase. I had one last file. It was old. The paper was yellowed, enclosed in a protective plastic sleeve. "I expected you to say that." "Ronald," I said, "you have been telling that story for as long as I can remember. The typewriter, the one-room office, the grit." I opened the file and projected the document onto the smart screen at the front of the room. It was a deed of trust, dated 32 years ago. "This is the original incorporation document for the firm," I said. "And this is the loan agreement that secured the initial operating capital and the lease for that first office on Chestnut Street." I zoomed in on the signature line of the guarantor. It was not Ronald Hollis. It was Margaret Graham. "My mother," I said. The room went deadly silent. "You didn't scrape together a loan." "Ronald," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet. "You couldn't get a loan. The banks turned you down because you had no collateral. My mother put up her trust fund as security. She underwrote the risk. She paid the rent for the first 2 years while you were building your legacy. She bought the furniture. She paid the secretary." I looked at the partners. They were staring at the screen. They had never known. Ronald had sold them the story of the rugged individualist, and all along, he had been standing on a foundation paid for by his wife's family money. "And the current building," I continued, twisting the knife. "The one we are sitting in? The one you tried to surrender yesterday? It is owned by the Graham Family Trust. My mother bought the building to ensure you would never be evicted. When she died, That trust passed to me. I turned to Ronald. He had collapsed back into his chair. He looked small. The myth had evaporated. He was naked in front of his peers. "You built nothing alone," I said. "You built a reputation on the back of a woman you marginalized. You took her money. You took her support. And then you told her daughter that she wasn't real enough for this world." I faced the board. "I am not taking your firm," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, shifting from prosecutor to savior. "I am reclaiming the investment my family made. I am stopping this firm from swallowing the young people who actually do the work. The associates downstairs, Claire Vance, the litigation team, they are the ones who are self-made. They are billing 3,000 hours a year to pay for your country club memberships. I am doing this for them." I looked at Pike. I looked at Marlowe. I looked at Abernathy. "You have a choice," I said. "You can cling to a lie and sink with the captain, or you can acknowledge the truth. Sign the acquisition, and let us save the ship." I sat down. "The vote is now open." For a long minute, no one moved. The shame in the room was palpable. It was a thick, heavy thing. They were realizing that their entire professional identity was partially a fabrication. Then, Samuel Marlowe, the quietest of the three named partners, reached for his pen. "I have a mortgage," Marlowe said quietly, "and my wife is sick. I cannot afford a lawsuit." He signed the document in front of him. That broke the dam. Walter Pike sighed, a long, rattling exhalation, and signed. Abernathy glared at me, his face red, but he grabbed the pen and scribbled his name aggressively, as if the ink could stab me, one by one. The papers were passed down the table. The rustle of paper was the only sound. Finally, the stack reached the end of the table. It sat in front of Ronald. He was the managing partner. Without his signature, the transfer of control would be contested. It would be messy. We would win, eventually, but it would take months of litigation that the firm could not survive. Ronald stared at the signature of his wife on the screen. Margaret Graham. He looked up at me. His eyes were wet. For the first time in my life, I did not see the arrogance. I did not see the judgment. I saw a man who had finally run out of places to hide. "I wanted to be big," he whispered. "I just wanted to be big." "You were big," I said. "But you were big because she held you up, and you never thanked her." He looked down at his hands. "I was wrong," he said. It was not a loud admission. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a simple, flat statement of fact. But coming from Ronald Hollis, it was an earthquake. "I was wrong about her," he said. He paused, swallowing hard. "And I was wrong about you." He picked up his pen. His hand was shaking. A tremor of age and defeat. He signed his name, Ronald Hollis. He capped the pen and placed it gently on the table. It sounded like a gavel coming down. "It is done," he said. He stood up. He did not look at his partners. He did not look at the screen. He looked at the door. "I will be in my office," he said. "Packing." He walked out of the room. He looked like a ghost. I let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. My shoulders dropped half an inch. The tension in the room dissipated, replaced by a strange, exhausted relief. "Julian," I said into the silence, "collect the documents." I stood up and addressed the remaining partners. "Gentlemen," I said, "welcome to Redwood and Vale. The transition team will be here in 1 hour to begin the integration. Your accounts have been frozen pending audit. You will receive your new contracts by end of day." I turned to leave. "Ms. Graham?" Marlowe asked. I stopped. "What happens to him?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair where Ronald had sat. "He retires," I said. "He becomes a grandfather. He learns to live in the real world." I walked out of the conference room into the hallway. The associates were gathered near the water cooler, looking anxious. Claire Vance was among them. When she saw me, she stepped forward. "Is it over?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "It is over. The firm is ours." I saw the relief wash over her face. She smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "Thank you," she said. Do not thank me yet, I said. Get back to work. We have a lot of billing to catch up on. I walked toward the elevator. I needed air. I needed to step outside and breathe the humid St. Louis air and know that the ghost was finally laid to rest. I had won. I had dismantled the lie. I had saved the future. But as the elevator doors closed, shutting out the view of the office I now owned, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a strange, quiet sorrow for the man who had to lose everything to understand the value of what he had. He had built a house of cards. I had just blown it down. Now, I had to sweep up the mess. The ink on the acquisition papers was still drying when the atmosphere in the Hollis building began to shift. It was not a sudden explosion of joy, but rather the collective exhale of 100 people who had been holding their breath for years. The takeover was official. Redwood and Vale had absorbed the assets, the liabilities, and the human potential of the St. Louis firm. We were not conquerors marching in to burn the village. We were the structural engineers arriving to shore up the foundation before the roof collapsed on everyone's heads. I spent the first 48 hours doing the unglamorous work of integration. I sat with the HR teams, ensuring that the payroll systems were merged so that no one missed a check. I met with the IT specialists to upgrade the archaic servers that Ronald had refused to replace since the early 2000s. I reviewed the case files, separating the toxic assets from the winning strategies. It was surgical, it was precise, and it was entirely devoid of the emotional chaos that had defined my father's tenure. On Friday afternoon, I called a town hall meeting. We gathered in the main atrium of the building. The space was lined with marble my mother's money had paid for, and filled with the entire staff. There were the senior partners, looking uncomfortable in their expensive suits. There were the paralegals, clutching their notebooks. And there were the associates, the young lawyers who had been billing 3,000 hours a year with no promise of a future. I stood on a small riser at the front of the room. I did not use a podium. I wanted them to see me, not a figurehead behind a barrier. Ronald sat in the front row. He was wearing a gray suit. He looked stripped of his armor. For the first time, he was not the man speaking. He was just another face in the crowd, waiting to hear his fate. "Good afternoon," I said. My voice carried clearly through the hushed atrium. "My name is Eleanor Graham. By now, you have all read the emails. You know that Redwood and Vale has acquired this firm. You have heard the rumors about layoffs and restructuring. I am here to tell you the truth." I looked directly at the group of young associates standing near the back. "For a long time," I said, "this firm has operated on a model of extraction. You were asked to give everything, your time, your energy, your loyalty, in exchange for a promise that was never going to be kept. You were told that you were not ready. You were told that you had to wait your turn. You were told that the only way to succeed was to emulate the past." I paused. I saw Claire Vance watching me intensely. "That ends today," I declared. "Redwood and Vale does not invest in past glories. We invest in future performance. We are not here to preserve a legacy of stagnation. We are here to unleash the talent that has been stifled in this building." I gestured to the screen behind me. A list of names appeared. "Effective immediately," I said. "We are instituting a new partnership track. The artificial ceiling is gone, and to lead this new chapter, I am appointing a new head of the Midwest Litigation Group." Ronald straightened in his chair. I could see the muscle in his jaw twitch. He expected me to name a partner from New York. He expected me to bring in a carpetbagger to run the show, or perhaps, in his deepest delusion, he thought I might name him as a gesture of goodwill. "Please join me in congratulating Claire Vance," I said. The room went silent for a heartbeat, and then it erupted. The applause was not polite. It was raucous. It was the sound of people seeing justice done in real time. Claire stood there, stunned, her hand covering her mouth. She was 32 years old. She was a woman, and she was the one person who had actually kept the firm's biggest client from walking out the door. Ronald turned to look at her. He saw the way the other associates were patting her on the back. He saw the respect in their eyes, a respect he had demanded but never truly earned. He looked at Claire, and then he looked at me. In that look, I saw him realize something profound. Claire was the lawyer he had told me I could never be. She was sharp. She was tough. But she was also human. By promoting her, I wasn't just making a business decision. I was proving that his definition of strength had been wrong for 30 years. I was elevating the very archetype he had tried to crush. I waited for the applause to die down. "One final announcement," I said. I walked over to the entrance of the main conference room, the room where he had told me I was nothing, the room where the board had signed their surrender. 2 workmen were standing by the double doors, holding a covered object. "For 3 decades," I said. "This firm has told a story about its origins. It was a story about a self-made man pulling himself up by his bootstraps. It was a good story, but it was incomplete." I signaled to the workmen. They pulled the velvet cloth away. Revealed on the wall was a new bronze plaque, heavy and permanent. The letters were raised, catching the light. "The Margaret Graham Conference Room. Dedicated to the woman whose vision and generosity laid the foundation of this house." A gasp rippled through the older staff members. They knew my mother's name, but they had never known her role. My mother, Margaret Graham, provided the initial capital that built this firm, I said, my voice steady. She signed the first lease. She secured the first loan. She is the silent partner who made all of this possible. Today, we give her back her voice. From now on, when you walk into this room to fight for your clients, you are walking into a space built by a woman who believed in the future. I looked down at Ronald. He was staring at the plaque. His face was unreadable. He had spent a lifetime hiding that name, burying the source of his safety so he could play the hero. Now, the truth was bolted to the wall in bronze. He could not tear it down. He could not talk over it. "Thank you," I said to the room. "Now, let us get to work." I stepped off the riser. The crowd swarmed Claire Vance. I slipped away toward the backstage corridor, needing a moment of quiet. I did not get it. I heard heavy footsteps behind me. I turned to see Ronald. He had followed me away from the celebration. He looked older than I had ever seen him. His shoulders slumped, the vitality drained from his posture. We stood in the narrow hallway, the sounds of the party muffled by the heavy doors. "You renamed the room," he said. His voice was not angry. It was hollow. "I corrected the record," I replied. "You gave the job to the Vance girl," he said. "She is too young. She is going to make mistakes." "She will," I agreed. "And I will help her fix them. That is what a mentor does. Dad, they don't cut you down to keep you small. They help you grow so you can stand on your own." He leaned against the wall, looking at his shoes. "You did this to punish me. The takeover, the plaque, the public humiliation. You wanted to show everyone that I am a fraud." "No," I said, gentle but firm. "I did this to save the people you were going to destroy. I did this to protect the assets my mother left me. The fact that the truth hurts you is not my fault. It is just the cost of the lie you have been living." He looked up at me. His eyes were watery, red-rimmed with exhaustion and regret. "I just wanted a dinner," he said softly. "I asked you for dinner, to talk. Not about work." "We can have dinner," I said, "but not tonight. Tonight belongs to Claire. Tonight belongs to the team." "Why? Ellie?" he asked. The question seemed to be ripped out of him. "Why did you have to come back and do it like this? Why couldn't you just stay in New York and let me finish my time?" "Because you called me," I said. "You sent the proposal. You invited me back." "I didn't know it was you," he whispered. "That is the point," I said. "You never knew who I was. You looked at me for 18 years and you saw a reflection of your own insecurities. You didn't see me." He was silent for a long time. The air conditioning hummed above us. "I was afraid," he said finally. It was the first time I had ever heard him admit fear. "Afraid of what?" I asked. "Of failing?" "No," he said. He looked me dead in the eye, and for the first time, he was completely honest. "I was afraid of you." I stared at him. "Me? I was a child who wrote poetry and cried when the cat died." "You were relentless," he said. "Even when you were little. You had this intensity. You saw everything. You remembered everything. I knew that if you ever turned that mind toward the law, you would be better than me. You wouldn't just be good. You would be great. And His voice cracked. "I couldn't handle being the second-best lawyer in my own house," he confessed. "I broke you so I wouldn't have to fear you surpassing me. I told you that you were weak, so you wouldn't realize how strong you were." The confession hung in the air between us. It was ugly, and it was selfish, and it was the most human thing he had ever said. He hadn't hated me. He had been jealous of me. He had seen his own obsolescence in my eyes, and he had tried to stomp it out. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't forgiveness. Exactly. It was lighter than that. It was the release of a burden I hadn't realized I was carrying. I wasn't defective. I wasn't too soft. I was just too much for a small man to hold. "Thank you for telling me that," I said. "Do you hate me?" he asked. "No," I said. "I don't hate you. Hate takes too much energy, and I have a firm to run." I adjusted the strap of my bag. "We can have that dinner next week," I said. "But understand the terms. I am not coming as your daughter who seeks approval. I am coming as the woman who owns the building. I am coming as Eleanor Graham. If you want to be in my life, you have to look at me. You have to see me as I am, not as the threat you imagined." "I will try," he said. "That is all I can ask," I replied. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back to see if he was watching. It didn't matter anymore. His gaze no longer defined me. I walked out of the building, past the security guard who nodded at me with recognition, and pushed through the revolving doors into the street. The sun was setting over St. Louis, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. The humidity had broken, leaving the air crisp and clean. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment. I was alone. I didn't have a husband waiting for me, or a cheering crowd, or a ticker-tape parade. I had a hotel room and a flight back to New York in the morning. I had 1,000 emails to answer and a merger to manage. But as I looked up at the skyline, at the building where my mother's name was now on the wall, and where a young woman was starting her dream job, I felt a profound sense of peace. I wasn't the girl who waited. I wasn't the girl who asked. I was Eleanor. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. I took a deep breath, filled my lungs with the cool evening air, and hailed a cab. I was free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly hope Eleanor's journey of reclaiming her power resonated with you. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please leave a comment down below sharing your city or country, and let me know what you thought of that final conversation between Eleanor and her father. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the Kate Revenge Stories channel, hitting that like button, and pressing the hype button to help this video reach more people who might need to hear a story about finding their own strength. See you in the next one.